Good morning, and thank you everyone for joining us for the first Ecolab Food Safety Matters webinar of 2017. Today, Dr. Ruth Petran, Ecolab Vice President of Food Safety and Public Health, will discuss the components of a strong food safety program. At Ecolab, Dr. Petran provides technical expertise and consultation to internal and external customers on food safety and public health issues. She also works to identify and track emerging food safety trends and new control strategies. Dr. Petran is a member of the National Advisory Committee for the Microbiological Criteria for Foods and the Minnesota Food Safety and Defense Task Force. She is a member of the International Association for Food Protection, the Committee on Control of Foodborne Illness, and the Institute of Food Technologists. She also is a certified food scientist. Dr. Petran has a bachelor's degree in consumer food science from Cornell University, a master's degree in food science from the University of Minnesota, and a doctorate in public health, also from the University of Minnesota. Dr. Petran, we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Roman, and I'm very, very pleased to be here today and look forward to speaking with all of you who have joined, and it's quite a nice crowd of folks, and again, thanks for joining us. I am eager to hear your questions, so as was described, please feel free to type those in and we'll get to those at the end. But to start off, I would like to just review some of what we believe are components of a very strong food safety program. Because obviously, food safety is vitally important for all of us. In the U.S., the Centers for Disease Control annually publish data on outbreaks, and an outbreak is defined as more than 2 illnesses in most cases. And increasingly, the CDC has visibility to even relatively small outbreaks. But we learn from these. For example, 78% of recently published outbreaks indicated that a large majority occurred in food service facilities, including restaurants, through catering establishments, and at places like banquets. Further, we know that many of the citations, which may or may not be related to an outbreak, but just are typically recorded, do relate to cleanliness of food contact surfaces. And in 25% of the time, it was noted that they were not properly cleaned and sanitized. So obviously, proper cleaning and food preparation practices are vital to help reduce food safety risks. But what are the risks? Well, CDC gives us good clues about these as well in their published contributing factors to foodborne illness, where they're able to identify these from the investigations that they do. And from these data, we know, for example, that poor personal hygiene contributed to about 1/4 of the outbreaks, as did issues with improper holding from a temperature standpoint. Unsafe sources, or where the food originated from before it entered the establishment, contributed to 17% of illnesses. Inadequate cooking to 15%, contamination about 12%, and then many other factors contributed as well. Now, it's really key that we learn from these past experiences and modify and target our efforts so we don't have repeated issues. And we all know this because food safety issues can pose a significant risk to brands. Historical examples tell us that there can be as much as double-digit sales declines following food safety issues. And in fact, in one instance, it took up to 2 years or longer for a company to recover from an incident, and history would tell us that some don't recover. Now, the National Restaurant Association has put some figures around this and tell us that one incident may cost as much as $75,000 per establishment. And this includes legal fees, medical claims, lost wages, cleaning and sanitizing costs. Obviously, this translates to lost sales, lost customers, and certainly impacts on a facility's and company's reputation. So this risk to brand is certainly important, but public health protection is also and has to be top of mind for establishments, because we know that consumers are increasingly concerned about food safety. And some recent facts highlight this. Published data on foodborne illness risk indicates that about 1 in 6 Americans get sick each year from consuming contaminated food and drink. We have survey data as well. We know that more than half of people are concerned about food safety when they eat out. And in many cases, that their level of concern has recently increased. Also, it's disheartening to hear, but about half of consumers, frankly, don't think that food service establishments are doing enough to provide consumers with safe food. And a full 90% of respondents to the survey indicated that they do take note of food safety incidents at restaurants. So this does impact them. But we also need to think more basically, because we know there's 3,000 deaths each year due to foodborne illness, and the inevitability of an aging population tells us that 30% of individuals are especially at risk because of changing demographics and a growing population of older adults. So it's imperative that your food safety program be formalized, because creating this better experience for your guests certainly translates into stronger protection for your business. It will also allow you to ensure satisfaction of your guests, engage with your staff, reduce risk, and also protect your brand. So what does this look like? Well, we believe that there are 4 basic components of a strong food safety program, and these are shown on the slide, and we'll go into these in more detail. First of all, consideration of clean environments, also of the food, looking at data and looking at where compliance is needed, and then focusing on training and awareness. So first, clean environments. This encompasses many areas, and we've chosen to describe several of them. First being hand hygiene. It's key that this be made a priority, communicated to your staff, made convenient, and really keep it top of their mind through communications. And the gray box on the slide highlights information obtained in research done and published recently that talked about barriers to hand washing. When there were issues found, these are the kinds of criteria that impacted the compliance or people washing their hands. Things like staff was too busy, hand sinks weren't visible, they were understocked, there was no soap or paper towels. Also, another barrier was wearing of gloves, creating this false sense of security among workers, leading them to think that they didn't really need to wash their hands. Also, that hand hygiene wasn't considered a priority, and they didn't really make the connection between hand hygiene and foodborne illness. And finally, just issues due to irritated skin due to frequent washing. So again, another opportunity to work to overcome these barriers, which research tells us do exist, to make hand washing much more convenient. But beyond hands, we need to think about the surfaces in a restaurant, for example, making sure they are cleaned effectively and that an EPA-registered hard surface food contact sanitizer is used according to the labeled directions. And then equipment should be cleaned between various tasks to avoid cross-contamination, things like cutting boards, knives, and other utensils. But another aspect of environments are those non-food contact surfaces. Things like surfaces in the restrooms, sinks, countertops, the floors. High-touch surfaces and items where guests would interact, such as door handles and railings, even menus, tables. Also, thinking about in the dish machine that the right temperatures and sanitizers are used. And don't forget about other surfaces, including floors and drains, and ice machines where appropriate. Because we've done some research and demonstrated the presence of pathogens such as Listeria, Salmonella, and Staphylococcus in many places in food service environments, including floors, mops and buckets, and floors and drains. Obviously non-food contact surfaces, but to me these indicate that the potential is there and we should work to decrease its incidence as much as we can. So beyond clean environments, including hands and surfaces, we need to think about the food itself. And this really starts with knowing vendors and knowing the sources of these food items. So using a knowledgeable food safety expert to evaluate vendors is very helpful. And there are published standards for produce in the good agricultural practices and for other kinds of foods in the good manufacturing practices that can guide what needs to be done. When food arrives, delivery trucks should be inspected to make sure that they're sanitary and properly refrigerated. Make sure all food is dated and is not expired. And then don't be afraid to refuse a truck if there are issues that you see. We recommend that delivery trucks be refrigerated, obviously, for perishable items. And a temperature of 41 degrees or below is a good practice. But once we move food into the preparation area, we need to be continually concerned and thinking about these preparation areas because they do touch the food. So food contact surfaces need to be washed, rinsed, and sanitized prior to food preparation. And if it's in continuous use, that equipment needs to be cleaned and resanitized every 4 hours per the U.S. Food Code. You may choose to wear gloves as directed by local or state or federal standards, but beware that this could impact hand washing. It certainly can be managed and is a reasonable practice. And then certainly using a thermometer to make sure food is thoroughly cooked. And shown on the slide are recommendations from the U.S. Food Code for cooking poultry, raw ground meats, other meats, and then fruits and vegetables to various endpoint temperatures that have been demonstrated for food safety. Storage is really key as well. Obviously making sure that things like refrigerators are set to the proper temperature and verifying that they are achieving this. As a recommendation, setting a refrigerator temperature at a range of 35 to 38 could be a best practice to ensure that food is kept cold and for an extra measure of safety. But you need to evaluate this in your particular operation. Next, we need to think about visibility and compliance. And it's really important to partner with local public health officials. Often we see these officials as not necessarily someone we want to work with, but they are a wealth of information and need to be looked as such. They can provide a lot of knowledge and insights. So it's very important, for example, to consider inviting them into your business when things are going as they should, so you have a relationship with them. Because if an issue arises, like you have illness complaints or believe there may be something going on, it's really important to involve the health department right away. And having this prior relationship makes those conversations flow a lot more easily. It's important to conduct regular assessments yourself. Be constantly looking at opportunities for improvement and track progress and measure improvements against them. Finally, we recommend that you leverage both the health inspections, which you get from your local authorities, as well as voluntary third-party assessments, if you use those. This can help you understand where best practices are being followed and continue to emphasize those, and also highlight opportunities where you can enhance your food safety program. And on the slide, we've listed data from 2016 of top health department violations which we identified in our review of data. And you can see the percent out of compliance across many, many thousands of inspections which we looked at. And there were issues with installation of the physical facility, cleanliness of surfaces, both non-food contact and food contact, issues with hand wash sinks being adequately supplied and accessible, issues with temperatures, and then some facility issues related to plumbing, lighting, storage, and then certainly contamination as well. So looking at these common violations, I think is really key because it can help you focus on high risks. And you each will have your own list of these that you may choose to focus on an establishment by establishment basis, or you could look collectively at a list like this that aggregates data from across the United States altogether to help you identify where to focus. And I'd like to go through a brief case study where we took a look at these data and leveraged what it told us to help us offer suggestions for improvement. So shown on this slide were the top 5 violations that were detected, and as you can see, they were related to chemical and food safety. For example, food contact surfaces were not cleaned and sanitized at a frequency of about 54%, which was about double the industry average that we were seeing. Also, there were issues with temperature and cold holding that also were more than double the industry average. There were issues with hand wash sinks, issues with storage of chemicals, and then the fact that hands were cleaned and properly washed, again, was more than twice what we were seeing. So understanding the importance of these issues is certainly key, but understanding it within the realm of your particular establishment and how it may relate to the rest of the world, so to speak, can be very helpful. So managing these particular programs focused on chemical and food safety areas can lead to significant improvement. So we use this to enhance a food safety program at this particular company. For example, in the products and innovation space, making sure that the use of EPA-registered products was standard. Consistently using time and temperature control devices. Making sure that hand hygiene products were effectively used. Using color coding on products and dispensers to make sure the right products for cleaning were used, but also that food items were handled and stored appropriately. Also providing basic right to understand information about chemicals, and then making sure equipment was serviced. So providing items to help. But having an item is one thing, knowing how to use it is key as well. So these have to be combined with procedures. So making sure the right procedures and guidelines are put in place to ensure that the right practices are being followed. It may include wall charts in the right languages for the particular family of workers, and then optimizing storage. And finally, this needs to be continually emphasized with ongoing service for employees initially on joining the company, to level set the teams and make sure everyone is starting from a common place of food safety. Also doing monitoring of tasks that were done, focused on issues of concern, cleaning and sanitization, for example, training on new products, reinforcing training through a variety of resources. This company elected to use video and digital options, and then verifying it through regular service visits and third-party assessments to monitor progress and look for continuous improvements. So again, leveraging the data to identify where improvements were needed. And what do we see from this? Well, results are still coming in, but generally outcomes have been very positive. And we've seen improvements in food safety, employee safety, and guest satisfaction through immediate and ongoing evaluations of their violations, so paying attention to the data, ongoing support and training provided during third-party audits, focusing on preventive maintenance and, where possible, fast fixes when issues arose, making sure that point-of-use materials were targeted to keep food safety top of mind, and then ongoing consultation with upper management so that they were aware of what was going on and could make sure resources were available to continue to improve these results and drive efficiency. The fourth component of a strong food safety program is training and awareness, and we certainly touched on this in the previous case study example, but just some best practices here. First of all, leading by example. So the importance of an engaged management staff, be it from a corporate level, if that exists, or certainly the direct on-site management of the particular facility is key. A manager should wash their hands just as often as they expect their line workers to wash their hands. Employees need to be trained on the full program, including clean environments, safe food, and visibility and compliance that we've talked about. Building engagement with employees is very key as well. Make sure the work is meaningful. Sharing the vision and purpose of the restaurant, which should include a food safety focus and eye on public health, but also enhancing the brand and building the business. Track progress, setting goals and challenges, using visible signage in the restaurant, posted where employees can see it, can help everyone be engaged and be working to enhance results even further. Training programs may need to evolve, making sure they're short, visual, interactive, in line with what workers and our staff need today and where and how they learn best. And finally, being transparent. This means being open to criticism in some cases, but taking in ideas and energy of your staff. Everyone has something to contribute. And listen to them. But at the same time, be transparent back and be open about the challenges that are being experienced and where improvements might be needed. And certainly sharing successes as well. So these are some tips, I think, that can really pull things all together to draw awareness of food safety and certainly end up with a stronger program that will enhance food safety for your guests and, I think, grow your business. So now we come to question time, and I will turn it over to my colleague Roman to start that. And again, I urge you to type a question into the chat or to the Q&A box, and we'll deal with those.
Great, Ruth. We have several questions. The first one The biggest challenge I face is being regulatory compliant, but also keeping operations happy. This often comes in the form of taking black and white regulations and implementing a gray area after doing a risk analysis. I know this is a challenge in general for most quality people. What is your advice in handling this type of situation?
Well, it's a really good question, and I think, curiously, the answer will be kind of gray as well. But I always go back to the science. And what's most key, and I'm glad the comment of risk analysis was included in this, because what's most key is to relate what you need to do and in developing risk management strategies to the relevant risks of concern for the particular company and establishment. And certainly public health needs to be top of mind. But also, what are other technical issues that might exist related to the kind of food that's being served, the particular establishment and what its structure is like, what resources are available, how many employees are in the facility, how old it is perhaps. So considering, again, within the four walls of the establishment, what are the relevant risks there? But you also need to think about the risks to the brand and to the business and any local or regulatory requirements that could impact this as well. Because you need to keep your inspectors happy so that you can keep your door open. So I think it's really key to step back and identify what the relevant risks are within these establishments, and then making sure that the programs and practices that are implemented address those risks. And it may mean that things do get gray because perhaps there's a local requirement that's different in how a corporate program would ideally be designed. But because it's very important, obviously, for the facility to stay open and operational, that needs to be considered as one of those risks that might be very relevant to that particular locale, which would be very different from perhaps a different part of the country. So it takes a lot of knowledge and a lot of understanding of what are all the inputs here that I need to sort out. And then look thoughtfully at those and determine, perhaps through a risk ranking, which ones to focus on as most key and focus your energies there.
Great. Thank you, Ruth. Another question, and this may be one that several on the call may experience. How do you avoid the "we've been doing this for years" mentality?
Oh, that's also a challenge as well. I think as best as possible to point to published information, such as some of the things we listed here, what the types of violations are that are being seen. And I think, some of that data can be very helpful in just understanding, kind of the landscape. And thinking that, well, just because we've done this and haven't been caught at it, it's okay to keep doing this, needs to be refuted by the fact that, hey, these things do cause issues elsewhere. And we're just perhaps literally an inspection away or an outbreak or an illness away from one of these things happening to us. I think understanding how foodborne illness can be spread, understanding the sources, the kinds of foods that can be more risky, is really important. But I think it takes some education and awareness, as we mentioned, for your employees. Maybe not speaking, in big words, so to speak, but personalizing it to them, and helping them to understand what the consequences can be and are today that we see.
Great. Which measures should restaurants take to help prevent food safety incidents?
Oh, there's several things. First of all, certainly being aware of what the risks are, knowing where your food comes from, having an awareness of your vendors and suppliers. What do they do to prepare the food or handle the food? How are they transporting it? That they're up to code. Again, following things like those good ag practices or good manufacturing practices. And then constantly making your staff aware through a variety of methods, using visuals where you can, hands-on training. Also, making it just a part of your culture that if staff are sick, they stay home. That means managers too. And I certainly will raise my hand to admit that I've come to work when I haven't been feeling good. And that's not a good example to set. And I think we need to just get more comfortable with admitting that, yeah, I should not be here today. And making it acceptable for that to be done. Also encouraging hand hygiene, perhaps with signage, reinforcing best practices, showing people the implications of their not doing it, and then thinking food handling as well. So what are the cross-contamination risks in storage and preparation? How do we overcome those? What temperatures, rather, do foods need to be stored at, cooked to, held at, etc. So again, thinking in line and where the risks are, and then putting up the right controls to best manage those.
Great. In your perspective, or from your perspective, what are the top challenges when dealing with regulatory or government agencies during a foodborne illness outbreak?
A lot of times it's just understanding what the requirements may be, and these can vary from place to place. So understanding what the role is of a local inspector, perhaps a state health lab or health department, and even what the CDC does. And there are graphics and information resources online, certainly from the CDC, but also from state and local health departments as well, to help you just be aware of what the procedure looks like, and who gets involved at what point, what kinds of information they may be asking for, et cetera, so you're prepared. And trialing this, or at the very least, thinking through in your mind, or perhaps writing out a procedure to document what it is you would need to do. But along with this, maintaining these good relationships with these various groups is really key as well, because they can help you implement these practices and understand and help you design this program so that if and when something happens, that you're ready and that you have been following their advice. And that will certainly go a long way, because they're a great resource. These are trained food safety people who have access to potentially even more resources than you're aware of. So please engage with them so that you're best prepared.
Great. Ruth, restaurants, many or most have an open time and a close time. So how do restaurants that are open 24/7, the 24-hour restaurant, how do they ensure that their equipment is properly cleaned within the proper time frames and that they're adhering to food safety best practices given the fact that they are open 24/7?
Sure. To me that's certainly something we're seeing more commonly today. And needs to be factored into the risks that could exist in that establishment. And they will be different, obviously, with a continually opening or open situation versus one that closes in the night hours. I think it's very important within that 24-hour cycle that there's an awareness of what the traffic flow is like. Are there times when there are just reduced customers? Maybe that's in the middle of the night. Maybe that's in the middle of the day, depending on where that particular establishment may be. And then leveraging that to your advantage and using those slower times, whenever they may be, to perhaps consider things like a more limited menu that could be available then. If possible, if food can be prepared and held appropriately for service during those times, that could be a way to manage through it. To shift menus a little bit, having, again, some foods not being readily available. But you need to, define that for the particular operation. And then take advantage of those times to perform equipment sanitation where it's needed. Perhaps consider redundant equipment where you can take one piece of equipment out of service and substitute in the spare one while you are effectively cleaning and sanitizing the other one. There are places that do things like that. Perhaps it's bringing in additional staff for either the busy times so that you can incorporate and bring in more cleaning and sanitizing practices during those times, or even in one of those slower times to employ more people so that they can just get to more of that equipment and surfaces and so on with a larger workforce and get everything done more quickly. But again, just some best practices and ideas that I've seen, but it does need to be tailored to the particular operation. And I think that question really does highlight the fact that you need to be very cognizant of factors such as, what are our working hours in designing the most optimal food safety programs.
Great. Ruth, we've had several questions come in regarding the use of gloves, and I'll throw two of them your way. The first is, what is the best way to monitor if employees are changing gloves between tasks as they should be? And along those lines, what is a good way to get upper management to see the seriousness in the issues and violations that could be associated with changing gloves infrequently or not within the required period?
Sure. Well, as far as monitoring glove changes, I've seen a couple things used, and this could take some explaining and could be more complex than might be beneficial, but perhaps things like using different colors of gloves, and requiring that people switch from one color to the next. Now, this would have to be managed very carefully and within the guise of the restaurant, but that could be a way to do it. There's complexity with that, obviously, because typically many people in a restaurant are doing different tasks, and their rate of glove changes may vary depending on these different sorts of tasks that they're doing. So depending on the complexity of the operation and the breadth of the different kinds of foods and preparation practices, that might be way more trouble than it's worth, but it could be an option. Also, just making it a practice, perhaps, that everybody changes their gloves at X amount of time. And it needs to be tailored to the particular operation, how long that time frame might be. Maybe it's just a practice that they're changing gloves all the time. After doing any task, they are changing them. Obviously, that needs to be factored into various job roles within the restaurant, the budget of the restaurant, and so on. But that is an option that could be suggested. How to get upper management in line? I think what I have used and seen done is is using the data to tell the stories. You know, really digging into what we know about issues that can arise from people and from their hands. It could be a person-transmitted pathogen like norovirus, or something that comes from one of the foods in the restaurant, like salmonella, that could be associated with raw meats. And really talking specifically about what the risks are, and that and weaving this into a story and playing this out of, you know, we know that there are pathogens in raw chicken, for example, so in order for us to protect our guests, we may need to do many things to handle that chicken appropriately, including cooking and storage and so on, but also in the handling, and emphasizing that the gloves themselves can be a way that the pathogens can be moved around. So again, painting the picture of this to set it up for them as, hey, this is just essential to our ensuring that that raw meat, for example, is not going to make somebody sick. We need to consider all of these pieces and parts. And sometimes laid out like that, it's easy to see where issues can arise. And this can be really relayed back to glove use. I think also making sure that upper management, if and when they come into a restaurant, are aware of what they need to do with gloves. Just as important for the employees who may be doing these kinds of things every day, that occasional visit from an upper management official needs to be following the same kinds of practices. And there needs to be a culture, and this, albeit can be a little, frankly, scary to set up, but there needs to be a culture where someone would call out an upper management official if they're not following what the restaurant's practices are. One, this demonstrates that food safety culture is strong among the employees and emphasizes to that management that, hey, these employees have really got it. They do know what they're doing, and they're working to protect public health.
Great. Ruth, the restaurant industry is known to have high employee turnover. What are some best practices or guidance that you could provide to help ensure that employees are being taught proper food safety practices, given the fact that there may be high turnover within that particular location?
Sure. Yeah, that definitely is true. You know, for a variety of reasons, people move on, perhaps to a better opportunity, or circumstances just get in the way. But this is where I think training is really key. And there are some standardized training programs available, such as the Serve Safe programs through the National Restaurant Association, that are brand neutral. You know, they are independent programs that teach the basics of food safety handling and practices and so on. These courses are available from a variety of venues, including online and so on. And once an employee has this training, albeit there might be subtle differences between how these programs are implemented from restaurant to restaurant, but the basic food safety knowledge and food safety practices awareness is there. So I think the more that we can get people to have a standardized background, and again, I point to this Serve Safe program as being very good, at least as a place to start, but there are others, that will help a lot for, one, ensuring the awareness and education of the employees within a particular establishment, but then also as they may move to somewhere else. But then within the establishment itself, obviously continuing to emphasize the kinds of things that would have been obtained in these more formalized kinds of programs, with catchy training messages that are relatively continuous, either through signage in restaurants, perhaps a 5-minute, food safety training tip or 2 minutes food safety training tip every morning, or sent as text messages on people's phones, through, I've seen establishments where it's a computerized time clock, so that as people log in and indicate that they are at work and ready to work, or sign in rather, they are flashed a food safety reminder about something that they need to be aware of. But again, just a quick visual to continue to emphasize these kinds of messages, I think can reinforce what people should have learned, but keeping that in mind is really key.
Great. Ruth, I know that digital technology is playing a greater role in the food industry in helping to ensure food safety, but this is a bit of a twist. Have you come across any incident where the use of mobile phones during food preparation has resulted in cross-contamination of a final product? I'm guessing that the use of mobile phones during food preparation should be discouraged, but would like your take.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I really don't have a direct answer. I'm not aware of where that could have been an issue, but in general, I have seen studies where high-use devices like our phones and computer keyboards and so on have been swabbed and those swabs tested then for microbes. And guess what? There's a lot of stuff there. How that may relate to those microbes resulting in an illness is more challenging to connect, but certainly the potential is there. And even though we may not have a direct illness outbreak that we can point to, I think we have to understand and just think very practically about how we use our phones. We sometimes put them up to our faces, and we know there are bacteria on our skin. Certainly, we may use them as we're eating at a restaurant, so inevitably there could be food debris on the screens and surfaces and in the nooks and crannies of our phones. And with debris there could be growth, none of which can be visibly seen by us. We just need to think about, where has this device been? And I know I certainly want to have mine next to me if I was in a restaurant kitchen. So we need to think about that. I'm also not aware of really practical ways that these devices can be really effectively sanitized. Obviously, we need to keep them away from lots of water and so on. I think just kind of pointing out what the potential risk is needs to be done, because we just don't know what can happen.
Great. Earlier in the presentation, you had talked about suppliers and knowing and understanding where your food is coming from and how it is being transported and handled. What can you do for foods that are imported to help monitor and track food safety? Are the processes and procedures similar, or are there unique things that one should take into account when wanting to monitor food safety for foods that are imported?
That's a really good question. And, of course, like most food safety answers, it's going to be an it depends on a lot of things. Certainly the food itself, what's inherent in how it's grown, harvested, processed, whatever might be appropriate. So it's important to be aware of that and to know how that food goes from its original source, be it a plant or an animal, to that nice case of spices, for example, or bottle, a jar of spices that you might get in the restaurant. It is required that any food that is sold in the U.S. or used in the U.S. meet U.S. regulatory requirements, and that includes food safety. So there are, for all imports, various checks done at the border to make sure that, and sometimes foods are sampled, but to make sure that that's being complied with. But obviously, sampling doesn't necessarily tell you everything. It's a good indicator of what could be a concern. But knowledge about those vendors is really key. So depending on what the relationship you may have with that vendor, whether it's through a distributor who accumulates lots and lots of imported foods and then delivers them to you, on a truck with lots of other items, going back to that distributor and asking them what they know about the prepper or the processing practices of this particular item are, and really digging in and asking that. Increasingly, there are global standards under the Global Food Safety Initiative, for example, that level the playing field and are available as audit criteria that a variety of third-party food company auditing bodies can go in and inspect and make sure that a supplier anywhere in the world is meeting the particular criteria for food safety and quality. And these are a very wide-ranging set of criteria focusing on cleanliness of that food plant, for example. They can focus on agricultural kinds of practices for produce items, for example. They can focus on transportation and warehousing, the practices that are done in the plant for cleaning and sanitizing, for processing, for pest control, for you name it, there's criteria written against it. So I think what's most key is, one, being aware of where everything comes from, down to the company level and the country where it's coming from, and then asking a lot of questions and not just assuming that what you get from your distributor is safe unless you have this background information. Many distributors have these kinds of requirements on the items that they then in turn supply to you. So they may be doing some of this work for you, but it's important that you ask about that and understand the depth of what they are doing.
Great. We're coming up on the top of the hour, so one last question for you, Ruth. Even a strong food safety program, even if there's one in place, there can be one action that can cause food safety harm to that organization, whether it's some type of contamination that leads to an outbreak or something along the following. So if by chance this were to occur, what are the first action steps that restaurants need to take to mitigate negative results of a foodborne illness outbreak?
Oh, broad question. I think it really depends on what that particular action is, but being aware of what that is. And I think this relies on a couple things. One, that there's a culture that if a mistake is made, and we all make mistakes, we need to be able to own up to them and admit that, hey, this happened, or I saw this, didn't look right, or whatever, and just make it be known. Because often if these issues can be managed essentially right as they occur, that can help a lot in putting a smaller boundary around the potential impacts of this. So one, making sure that people are comfortable in doing that. Then I think it's an investigation into, what are the potential outcomes of that particular behavior or action, and then to get that information accumulated, then turning to, okay, what do we need to do about this on an immediate basis to protect public health? How do we need to interact with our regulators? And then what do we need to do? And then making sure you can put that in place, obviously, as soon as possible. Because depending on the seriousness of the issue, the safety of your consumers and those in the vicinity could be really impacted, and it's key that that be top of mind. So with that, and I thank you all for your very insightful questions, I do just want to add a couple of final thoughts, and this should be very obvious because we've talked through it, but important for me is to really think like a hazard and think about what those hazards may be, but make sure to assess the particular risks of that hazard to your business, to your establishment, to the kinds of food, kinds of consumers, et cetera. And be aware of where that hazard comes from, how it can be spread, and any new developments that might be there. Then you need to make sure you have proven preventive controls in place, enforce and reinforce these procedures and practices with your staff, verify that they're being followed, make sure you have continuing connections with food safety experts, investing in food safety, which might be various tools and technologies, having partnerships, again, liaison with your local regulatory officials can be one of those, but really just be persistent and don't take your eye off the ball.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. A recording of this presentation will be available at ecolab.com beginning this Friday, March 31st. We also will be emailing topic materials to you. So for those who have registered, we do have your email address, and we will be sending out information to you shortly after this webinar concludes. Don't forget, there is a survey following today's webinar. Please complete the survey. This is also where you can request continuing education certificates. So we log that, and we will email those out to you in the coming days. Our next Food Safety Matters webinar is Tuesday, June 13th at 10 a.m. Central Time. That will be hosted by Dr. John Barkay from Ecolab's Pest Elimination Team. He will be discussing large flies and tips to prevent and eliminate their presence. Again, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you or speaking with you at our next webinar on Tuesday, June 13th. Thanks, and have a great day.